Hi all, I received very sad news this morning that Bob Wade died very early in the morning hours, about 3 AM. He was suffering from a form of pneumonia, I believe. Full details about it can be found on the BCM Chess news site. Bob is someone who was a very widely respected player, author, publicist, arbiter, general marketer for the game of chess, and he played Fischer on 3 occasions, and I'd like to do a tribute video annotation for him. So this game, which he drew with Fischer in 1965, was played in the Capablanca Memorial Tournament. It was played by Telex, believe it or not, so both players playing remotely, and Fischer kicked off with e4 and Bob played e5, and he headed for the Marshall Gambit. So these are the standard moves of the Marshall Gambit. So Fischer was on the side of white, facing some fierce counterplay now by accepting the pawn on e5, and Bob played now c6, so all theory, and rook e1. So this was the main line for a long time against the Marshall Gambit, allowing queen h4. So black has some potentially dangerous threats. Fischer played g3, and after queen h3 played bishop e3. One of the ideas is that if bishop g4 now, the queen can go to d3, and then if bishop f3, then queen f1. So parrying the combination of queen and bishop, trying to attack the white king. Here though, Bob, instead of playing bishop g4, played actually h5, which is more novel, I believe. After queen f3, now h4. So at first the pawn has got dangerous tactical implications of undermining g3 and white's king safety generally, but potentially it can also be pushed to h3, and it's this later possibility which is used in this game. So we see here now Fischer took on 5, but it's far too dangerous for his queen to try and nab the pawn. Let's have a quick look. hg, now bishop takes g3, and in this position, after king f1, here I believe the strongest move according to Rivka is just rook e8, so reserving that threat of bishop h3, so the king can't escape because of losing the bishop on e3 now after this rook e8. So this would be pretty disastrous for white if Fischer had played this way. So rook a8, and here just queen takes e3, and it's all over. So basically in this position Fischer played knight d2, and Bob, for the pawn, he's got the 2 bishops, and still, strong possibilities of hg, maybe even f5, but in the game he actually just played bishop e6, and Fischer now offered the trade of bishops, removing black's better bishop on the dark squares. So this knight versus bishop ending is what Fischer wants to head to. Bob played bishop g4, allowing Fischer to forcefully get the queens off. So we see now the queen's coming off, and this form pawn now, h3 check. So after king g1, now bishop takes f4, so structural damage, but this is a potentially bad bishop to have against the knight, which potentially has got manoeuvres like knight b3 to c5. But Bob correctly assessed, he could hold this position. So we see now that the knight manoeuvred to b3, and now this move rook b6 is quite interesting. So the rook's useful on the b file in case black's able to get in later a5 and b4 as a minority attack against white's pawn chain. So is the knight committed to staying on b3, or will it venture to move to c5? That's the question. Fischer actually played king f2, and now Bob also centralised his king by first playing g6, and now king g7, and now king f6. So here, after knight a5, now rook h8 was played, so safeguarding that pawn on h3 prophylactically. But Bob's got an active plan now in mind, but so has Fischer. White's plan, judging from the game, was to create a passed pawn, but first clamping down on the c5 square. So Fischer played b4, after rook c8, Fischer played the defensive move rook 5 e3. After rook g8, it seems both sides were waiting for the opponent to weaken the position. Bob did commit himself now to changing the pawn structure. So instead of being content with shuffling rooks, but white is going to play a4, he tried to drum up some counterplay on the king side, so to avoid Fischer just building up a solid passed pawn. So what he did was controversially and cleverly just undouble white's pawns to try and rid himself of this g pawn, so he could use the g file and especially g2 as a pivot point for A, emphasising the power of this fawn pawn, and B, harassing the pawn on h2. So g5 was played, and with this Bob managed to get some counterplay going on the king side against Fischer. So Fischer arranged for this passed pawn strategy, first getting his knight to c5, and we saw now after ABCB that Fischer's able to now try and play for a4 to arrange his passed b pawn. So what was Bob going to do about this? Well, basically, because of that g-file operation earlier with g5, he's always got now the possibility of rook g2s. So he's cleared his g pawn out of the way, and although in theory, a solid pawn down, it's he's got enough counterplay to hold this position. So he's got to defend now against Fischer's passed b pawn, but he does so successfully, because Fischer even sacked his d pawn to try and get some acceleration of this pawn coming down the board without worrying about d4. But here, according to Rivka, black's definitely equalised now, and he starts pushing his own passed pawn, the d pawn. So we see now why this is a very good fighting game against one of the legends of chess, with the black pieces to dare to play the Marshall Gambit, and even in fighting towards this dynamic endgame. So basically, here again, this rook g2 is very annoying to Fischer. He can't ever take on g2 because that pawn will be queening. So Bob was able to blockade the b pawn with bishop b7, and bishop a8 is asking, white, what is he doing here? He can't take on d4 as knight to the rook. So how can white progress? Well, Fischer decided to actually take on d4 here. After rook takes h2, check, rook h6. So Fischer may have thought he's got some advantage potentially with knight c5 with the threat of b7, but rook b2 and the rook's behind the pawn quite safely. So after knight d4, now h2, and after king g3, a draw was agreed. So maybe it was Fischer that offered the draw, but so a very hard fought Marshall Gambit game against one of the legends of chess, played in the Capablanca Memorial of 1965. Let's have a quick overview and summary of that game again. So the Marshall Gambit being played against Fischer, with a novel idea of using this idea of h5 instead of the more standard bishop g4. So this h pawn was quite dangerous. Even after the queens came off, it was a useful form pawn, and another clever part of black's strategy was to undouble white's pawns, apparently leaving white a clear pawn up, but it was necessary to try and drum up some counterplay on the king side to parry Fischer's long-term plan of creating a pass pawn on the queen side. So Fischer's arranging for a pass pawn slowly but gradually, but the g-file has been shared now by both players, so white's always got to watch out for rook g8s and rook g2s. So once one pair of rooks came off, rook g2 was available to black, and Bob was able to allow Fischer to even accelerate that pass pawn because he took time to munch white's d pawn, but this endgame was clearly drawable. There was enough resources now for black to blockade white's dangerous b pawn and push his own pawn to h2. So a hard fought draw. May Bob Wade rest in peace and be remembered for all he's done for chess. Please leave any comments on YouTube. Thanks very much.